Out here, the Kansas wind never stops talking. It's a high, lonely sound that scours the plains flat, peels paint from the sides of buildings, and fills a man's eyes with dust until he cannot see the horizon. This is 1880s Kansas, and the land is hard. The towns are harder. Places like Prairie Creek were built on two things: cattle money and silence. The dirt roads were wide enough for a herd, and the spaces between the few buildings, a saloon, a dry goods store, a sheriff's office that mostly served the interests of the biggest rancher, were filled with suspicion. Power here was not held by the man with the shiniest badge. It was held by the man who owned the most land, the most cattle, and the most secrets. In Prairie Creek, that man was Silas Kendrick. His ranch was a sprawling testament to his will. His house the only one for 50 miles with 2 stories and glass windows. He was a pillar of the small community, a man who spoke little but whose quiet word could get a man hired or hanged. And like the land itself, Silas Kendrick held his secrets deep, burying them where no one thought to look. He buried his darkest secret right under his own feet, beneath the polished floors of the Kendrick homestead, under the rugs imported from St. Louis. There was a cellar. It was not the kind of cellar for storing potatoes or preserves. It was small, damp, and lined with stone, built into the cold earth, and in that dark, Lila lived. She had been there for so long that the world upstairs felt like a story she'd been told as a child, a story about a blue sky, a hot sun, and the feel of grass. Here, there was only darkness, the smell of damp earth and her own unwashed skin, and the sounds. She knew the rhythm of the house above her. The heavy, angry boot steps belonged to Kendrick. The quick, frightened shuffling belonged to Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper who brought her food twice a day and never, ever met her eyes. The scrape of the bolt on the heavy trap door was the sound of her world opening and closing. Lila spent her days in a fog of survival. She did not weep. Tears were a waste of the water they gave her. Instead, she marked the passing of time by the hardness of the bread. When it was fresh, it was morning. When it was stale, it was night. Her mind was her only escape, and she guarded it fiercely. She would sit in the blackness, her back against the cold stone, and she would remember. She remembered her mother's hands, strong and warm, braiding her hair. She remembered a song about a river. She remembered the color yellow, a field of sunflowers she had seen once, a lifetime ago. She held on to these things with a quiet dignity that Kendrick, in his cruelty, could not touch. He had taken her world, her name, her freedom. He kept her chained to the wall, a living ghost from a time before the war, a time when men believed they could own another soul. Kansas was a free state, had been for years, but the law did not reach down here. Down here, there was only Kendrick. Lila was his dirty secret, the one he had refused to let go of when the world changed, the girl he had inherited with the property, the one listed as lost in an old ledger, presumed dead by everyone but the 2 people in the house above. She was scarred. Her body was thin, her muscles wasted from disuse and lack of food, but she was not broken. She would trace the lines of the stones with her fingers, counting them. 112. She would save a crumb of her bread, hiding it in a crack, just to prove she had a choice. It was a small, defiant act. It was everything. Into this town of dust and secrets rode a man named Noah Hale. He looked like any other drifter passing through. His hat was pulled low, his duster coated in the grime of 1,000 miles, and his horse looked tired. He was lean, quiet, and had the kind of gray eyes that did not blink often, eyes that had seen too much weather and too much trouble. He tied his horse to the hitching post outside the Red Dog Saloon, pushed open the bat-wing doors, and stepped inside. The saloon went quiet. Every eye turned to him. The bartender stopped polishing a glass. A card game paused, hands hovering over chips. Noah Hale paid them no mind. He walked to the bar, put a coin on the scarred wood, and said in a low voice, "Whiskey." The bartender poured. Noah Hale took the glass, his hand steady, and drank it down in one smooth motion. He did not cough. He did not shudder. He just set the glass down. "Looking for work," he said, not to anyone in particular. "Not much work for drifters," the bartender said, his voice flat. "I am good with horses, can mend a fence." A big man at the card table laughed. He wore a holster tied low, and his vest was expensive. He was one of Kendrick's men, a foreman named Baxter. "We got all the hands we need, stranger." Noah Hale turned his head slowly. He looked at Baxter, his eyes empty of fear or challenge. "He just looked, did not ask you," he said. The air in the room got thick. Baxter started to stand up, his hand moving toward his gun. "Now, Jeb," the sheriff said, speaking for the first time from his corner table. He was an older man, paid to keep the peace, which meant paid to keep Kendrick happy. "The man's just asking." He looked at Noah. "You might try the livery. Old man Hemlock is always complaining about his back." Noah nodded once, picked up his saddlebags, and walked out. The saloon doors swung shut behind him, and the noise started up again, louder this time. But Noah Hale was not just a drifter. He was a man with a ghost riding on his shoulder. He was hunting, not for gold, not for trouble. He was hunting for his sister. Her name was Sarah. She had been bright and quick, and she had run away from their hard-scrabble farm in Missouri 5 years ago, chasing a promise from a smooth-talking man. Her last letter had come from a town near here. And then, nothing, just silence. Noah had buried his parents, sold the farm, and started riding. He was haunted by his failure to protect her, a guilt that sat in his belly like a cold stone. He took the job at the livery, mucking stalls and patching harnesses for a few dollars a day. It was honest work, and it gave him a reason to be in Prairie Creek. More importantly, it gave him a place to listen. Men came and went from the livery. They talked while their horses were shod. And the name they spoke most often, sometimes in respect, sometimes in fear, was Kendrick. Noah listened. He learned that Kendrick was a hard man, but fair, most said. He'd built his ranch from nothing. A widower. Kept to himself mostly. But there were whispers, too, ghost stories, some called them. Heard strange noises from that place at night. One farrier told another, his voice low, like a woman crying, right out of the ground. "That's just the wind, you fool." The other replied, "Or that crazy old housekeeper, Evans, she's been spooked since Kendrick's wife died." But Noah Hale filed it away. He started asking questions, simple ones. He'd ask about homesteads for sale, about the land. He'd ask about folks who had come through, looking for settlers who might have passed by. "Ever have a young woman come through here looking for work?" he asked old man Hemlock one afternoon, brushing down a mare. "My sister passed this way a few years back. I think, name of Sarah." Hemlock spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Can't recall. Lot of folks pass through. Not many stay. This land chews 'em up." He paused, thinking. Though Kendrick was looking for a new housekeeper about that time, after his wife passed, hired that Evans woman, don't recall no one else. Noah kept digging. He'd ride out onto the prairie at dusk, saying he was just stretching his horse's legs. He rode the boundary of the Kendrick ranch. It was a fortress. Good fences, sturdy gates. He watched the homestead from a distance. He saw Kendrick. He saw Baxter. He saw the housekeeper. Nothing else. But the barn, he noticed, was locked up tighter than the house. It had a new, heavy padlock on it, and the windows were boarded over. It was just a barn. But Kendrick treated it like a bank vault. One night in the saloon, trying to buy a drink for one of Kendrick's more drunk and loose-lipped hands, he heard another piece. "Old man Kendrick," the cowboy slurred. "He don't let no one in that barn. Not even Baxter. Says it's full of his dead wife's things. Sentimental, I suppose." The cowboy leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey. "But I heard he built a storm cellar under it. Built it himself. Years ago. Before the war. Even strongest cellar in the county." A storm cellar. A crying woman. A locked barn. A missing sister. The pieces did not fit. Not yet, but they made a dark and ugly shape in Noah's mind. He knew he had to get inside that barn. Weeks turned into a month. The prairie grass turned from brown to gray. The wind got a new, sharp edge to it. Winter was coming. Down in the dark, Lila felt it. The cold seeped through the stones, a damp chill that got into her bones and would not leave. She shivered constantly, huddled in the thin rags that were her only clothes. But something else was different. The rhythms upstairs had changed. There was a new voice. Not Kendrick, not Mrs. Evans. A low, quiet voice that she sometimes heard when the housekeeper brought her food. She'd hear Mrs. Evans talking, her voice high and nervous. "Mr. Kendrick won't like you asking. Mr. Hale. He just won't." And the low voice would reply, too quiet to make out the words. Hale, a new name, a new person. The footsteps were different, too. Sometimes, late at night, she'd hear someone walking outside, near the barn. The steps were slow, measured. They would stop, wait, and then move on. It was not Kendrick's impatient stomp. A terrifying, fragile thing began to grow in Lila's chest. It felt like a butterfly trapped in a jar. Hope. She had not dared to hope in years. Hope was a poison. It made the darkness blacker, the chains heavier. But this was different. This was a change. And change was the one thing that could break the pattern. She began to hoard her food in earnest. Not just a crumb, but half a piece of bread. A spoonful of the thin soup. She ate it in the deepest part of the night, trying to build a strength she had not felt in a decade. She began to pull at her chain, testing the link, testing the bolt in the wall, even though she knew it was useless. She imagined this might be her last winter in chains. The thought was so big, so bright, it almost blinded her. Then the storm hit. It came on fast, a white monster swallowing the plains. The wind did not just howl, it screamed. Snow fell so thick it was like a curtain, erasing the world. Noah Hale had been waiting for it. He knew from the talk in town that Kendrick and his men, including Baxter, were riding to the next county to buy a bull. They'd be holed up there, or in town, drinking at the Red Dog, waiting for the blizzard to pass. The ranch would be empty, save for the housekeeper, and she would be huddled by the fire in the main house, deafened by the storm. This was his chance. He saddled his horse, wrapped a scarf around his face until only his eyes showed, and rode out into the white fury. He kept his head down, trusting the horse to find the fence line he had memorized. The Kendrick ranch was silent, buried in snow, as he'd guessed. The main house was lit, smoke pouring from the chimney. The barn was dark. He dismounted, his boots sinking deep in the new drifts. He tied his horse to a post, where it would be shielded from the worst of the wind by the barn itself. He pulled a set of tools from his saddlebag. The new padlock on the barn door was good, but Noah had spent years opening things that were meant to stay closed. His fingers, even numb with cold, were deft. He worked the pick, listening, feeling the tumblers. With a sharp click, the lock sprang open. He pushed the heavy door open just enough to slip inside. He shut it behind him, plunging the barn into near total blackness. The only sound was the wind screaming outside and the nervous shifting of the animals in their stalls. He lit his lantern, keeping the flame low. The barn was clean, orderly, stalls for horses, a tack room, a large loft filled with hay. He saw Kendrick's expensive saddle, his initials carved into the leather. He saw his dead wife's things, just as the cowboy had said. A carriage covered in a dusty tarp, several locked trunks. Noah moved past them. He was looking for a storm cellar. He walked the length of the barn, his boots quiet on the dirt floor. In the back corner, half hidden by a stack of old blankets and empty grain sacks, he saw it, a heavy iron ring set into a square of thick wooden planks. He pulled the sacks away. He put his lantern down, gripped the iron ring with both hands, and pulled. The trapdoor was heavy, swollen with damp, but it budged. He heaved it open, scraping it across the floor. A wave of cold, foul air hit him, rising from the black hole. It smelled of sickness, of waste, of human despair. It was a smell he knew from the war, from field hospitals and prisons. His heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed his lantern and held it over the hole. A rickety ladder led down, and at the bottom, in the far corner, something moved. Lila had been asleep, a shallow, cold doze. The scrape of the trapdoor above her had jolted her awake. It was the wrong time. It was not Mrs. Evans. It was not Kendrick. She scrambled back against the stone wall, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small. Her heart was a trapped bird. He had come back. He was going to kill her. Then the light hit her. It was blinding, a pure, physical pain. She threw her arm over her face, shrinking from it. She heard boots on the ladder. A man was coming down. Noah stopped on the last rung, his lantern held high. He could not believe what he was seeing. She was skeletal. Her skin was pale, covered in filth and sores. Her hair was a matted tangle. She wore nothing but a few thin, rotted rags, and from her ankle, a heavy chain ran to a bolt in the wall. He saw the scars on her arms, her back. He saw the raw, red skin around the iron cuff. But worst of all were her eyes. When she finally lowered her arm, her eyes were wide and black, consumed by a terror so profound it was no longer human. It was the terror of an animal, trapped and expecting death. He had come looking for his sister. He had found this. Lila was too shocked to speak, too shocked to even scream. Her voice had been silent for so long. She did not know if it still worked. She just stared at the man, at the light, waiting for the blow. Noah stepped off the ladder. He moved slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse. He kept the lantern low, so it would not be in her face. He did not speak. He looked at the chain. He looked at her. He set the lantern on the ground. He had brought bolt cutters, thinking he might need them for the barn lock. He pulled them from his coat. At the sight of the tool, a small, choked sound came from Lila. She thought he meant to use it on her. "Shh," Noah whispered. His voice was rough from the cold. "I am not him." He moved to the wall, put the jaws of the cutters around the chain link, and squeezed. The metal groaned and then snapped with a loud crack. The sound echoed in the tiny space. The chain fell to the dirt floor. She was free of the wall, but she did not move. She was still chained to the dark, to the fear. Noah took off his heavy wool duster. It was warm from his body, smelling of snow and horse and the clean scent of the outside world. He stepped toward her. She flinched, but he was quick. He wrapped the coat around her, covering her thinness, her nakedness. It swallowed her whole. She was shaking, a violent rattling tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. Noah knelt in front of her. He looked into her terrified eyes. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. He only knew this was a wrongness so deep it stained the earth. She was too shocked to speak. She just watched him, her breath coming in tiny, shallow gasps. He did not ask if she wanted saving. He did not ask who she was. He simply whispered, "I am getting you out." He slid one arm under her back, the other under her knees, and lifted her. She weighed nothing. She was a bundle of sticks, a forgotten doll. He held her tight against his chest, her face pressed into his shoulder. He grabbed the lantern and climbed the ladder. He kicked the trapdoor shut, not caring about the noise. He carried her through the barn, the wind howling as he forced the big door open. They burst out into the white, spinning dark. The horse whinnied. Startled, Noah moved to its side, never loosening his grip on the woman. He mounted in one smooth motion, settling her in front of him, cradled against his chest. He wrapped the flaps of his coat tighter around her. He spurred the horse, turning it away from the ranch, away from the town, and pointing it into the teeth of the blizzard, into the empty, wild prairie. Lila did not make a sound. She was rigid with shock, her eyes wide open, feeling the sting of the snow on her face for the first time in years. It felt like fire. She felt the powerful arms of the stranger holding her, the heat of his body, the thunder of the horse beneath them. She did not know if she was being saved, or if she was just being stolen again. The horse was a ghost in a world of ghosts. It plunged through snowdrifts that were chest-high, fighting for every step. The wind was not a sound. It was a physical thing, a solid wall of ice and noise that tried to tear them apart. Noah Hale rode bent low, his body a shield over the woman in his arms. He had her wrapped in his heavy duster, her face tucked into his shoulder. But the cold was a living thing, and it was gnawing at them both. He could feel the shivers racking her body, a deep, violent tremor that went right into his own bones. She was a bundle of sticks, weighing nothing, and he feared she might snap. He did not know if they were being followed. He prayed they were not. The blizzard was their salvation and their executioner. It would cover their tracks, but it would also kill them if they stopped. He had to find shelter. He was not riding blind. In his weeks of scouting the Kendrick land, of watching and waiting, he had ranged far. He had seen this, a small draw, thick with old pines, invisible from the plain, and tucked inside it, the bones of an old cabin, a trapper's hideout, abandoned for a decade. It seemed to take a lifetime. The horse stumbled, recovered, plunged on. Lila made no sound. She was limp in his arms, her body rigid with cold and terror. He did not know if she was even conscious. Then he saw it, a dark shape, a collapsed roofline, shielded by the trees. Almost, he grunted, the words stolen by the wind. He slid off the horse, his legs so numb they nearly buckled. He held on to Lila, pulling her with him, and half carried, half dragged her through the snow to the door. It was falling off its leather hinges. He kicked it open. Inside, it was black. It smelled of damp, pine rot, and old animals. But it was out of the wind. He set Lila down gently on the floor, on a pile of dry, dead leaves in the corner. "Stay," he commanded, his voice rough. He went back out into the white. He led his exhausted horse into a small, three-sided lean-to attached to the cabin, just big enough to break the wind. He used his hat to brush the snow from its back, gave it the last of the small bag of oats from his saddle. "Good boy," he murmured. He grabbed his saddlebags and ran back inside. Lila had not moved. She was exactly as he had left her, a small heap in his coat, watching him with wide, dark eyes. He needed fire. He worked with a grim, practiced speed. He had a small tinderbox in his bag. He took his knife and shaved thin, dry slivers from the inside of the cabin's one broken table. He struck his flint. The spark caught. A small, hungry flame bloomed in the dark. He fed it, nurtured it. In minutes, a real fire was crackling in the crude stone fireplace. It lit the small, one-room space. It was a ruin, but it was safe. The orange light fell on Lila. He saw her clearly for the first time. She was not a woman. She was a child, a ghost. Her skin was the color of old paper, stretched tight over her bones. Her hair was a solid, filthy mat. He saw the raw, infected circle around her ankle, where the chain had been. He knelt, opening his saddlebag. He took out a small tin of salve and a strip of clean cloth he kept for gun cleaning. "Your ankle," he said. It was not a question. She flinched, pulling her leg back. "Hold still," he said, his voice not unkind, but firm. "It will fester. You will lose the foot." She froze. He took her foot in his hand. It was as cold as ice. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He took snow from the doorstep, melted it in his tin cup by the fire, and cleaned the wound. She hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but did not pull away. He spread the dark salve over the raw skin, then wrapped it tightly with the cloth. He sat back on his heels. He looked at her. She was filthy. The grime was ground into her. "You have to get clean," he said. He took the block of lye soap from his bag. He melted more snow, filling his small cooking pot, and set it by the fire to warm. Lila just stared at him, her eyes unblinking. She did not understand, or she did, and she was terrified of what came next. Noah sighed. The sound was full of a weariness that went deeper than the ride. "I am going to turn my back," he said, his voice low. "I will not look. I give you my word." He handed her the pot of warm water, the soap, and another rag. Then he stood, walked to the far side of the small cabin, and stared into the fire. He fed it more wood. He listened. He heard the small splash of water. He heard her sharp, pained gasp as the soap and water hit her damaged skin. Then he heard her crying. It was not a loud sound. It was the most terrible sound he had ever heard. It was a dry, broken, catching sound, as if her body had forgotten the mechanics of grief. It was the sound of a rust-locked gate being forced open. Noah Hale's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He squeezed his eyes shut. He thought of his sister, Sarah. He thought of her laugh. He wondered if this woman had ever laughed. He stayed where he was, his back to her, a statue of stone, giving her the only thing he had to give: privacy. When the small sound stopped, he waited a few more minutes. "Are you covered?" he asked. A tiny, hoarse sound. "Yes." He turned. She had his duster wrapped around her again, pulled tight, her knees drawn to her chest. The pile of rags she had been wearing lay on the dirt floor. He walked over, picked them up with 2 fingers, and dropped them into the fire. They flared up, smoked, and were gone. Lila flinched at the sudden movement, her eyes darting to his face, looking for the anger. He offered her a piece of dried beef. "Eat." She took it. Her hand, clean now, was thin as a bird's claw. He watched her. She tore at the tough meat with her teeth, her eyes darting around the cabin, at him, at the door. She ate with a desperate, furtive energy. He saw her eat half of it. Then, in a quick, practiced motion, she slipped the other half into the deep pocket of his duster. She was hoarding it, the same way she must have hoarded crumbs in the dark. He said nothing. He just sat on his bedroll, took out his own piece of jerky, and began to eat. The only sound was the fire and the wind howling outside. For 2 days, they lived in that silence. The blizzard raged, sealing them in. Lila did not speak. She huddled by the fire, wrapped in his coat, and she cleaned. It was a strange, obsessive thing. He gave her his spare shirt, a thick wool union shirt, and she put it on. It hung on her like a tent, but it was clean. Then she took the soap and the rag, and she began to scrub the floor. She scrubbed the stones of the hearth. When he gave her his canteen, she drank, then wiped the rim obsessively before handing it back. It was a routine, a way to build a wall around herself. He recognized it. It was the only control she had. She was still in the cellar, in her mind. She ate little, saving half of everything he gave her. She sat in a way that made her small, her back always to a wall. And she waited. He knew what she was waiting for. She was waiting for the punishment. She was waiting for him to tell her what she owed him. Noah just let her be. He went out to check on his horse, to set snares. He came back, sat by the fire, and cleaned his pistol. He mended his harness. He did not talk. He did not ask. He did not look at her unless he had to. He gave her silence. On the 3rd day, she was scrubbing the cooking pot with sand from the floor, her back to him. The soap, the fire, the clean pine scent of the wood. It unlocked something. She remembered. A hand. A large, warm, brown hand, calloused, spreading across her own small one. Her mother. They were washing clothes in a wooden tub, the sun hot on her back. Her mother was humming, a low, sad song that rumbled in her chest. Gonna wash these troubles away, Lila girl. Wash 'em right into the ground. She remembered her name, Lila. It felt strange, like a coat that did not fit. She stopped scrubbing, her hand frozen. She had not thought her own name in years. To think it was to remember what she had lost. Noah watched her. He saw her freeze, her whole body go rigid. He saw her hand tremble. He had been watching her for days, and a cold, familiar guilt was chewing at his gut. He was seeing Sarah. He remembered the last time he saw his sister. She was standing on the porch of their dry dirt farm in Missouri, twisting her apron in her hands. She was thin, like this girl, but with a fire in her eyes, a desperate need to be somewhere else. "There has to be more than this. Noah," she'd pleaded. "I cannot just dry up here." He had been hard. He had been practical. "The world is a bad place, Sarah," he'd told her. "You stay where you are safe." She had run. She had run after some smooth-talking man with promises of St. Louis. And she had vanished. Her last letter had come from near Prairie Creek. He had failed her. He had been too hard, too cold. He had let her go. Now he was here, with this woman. He had snatched her from one prison. But what had he brought her to? He was not a savior. He was just a man, haunted by a ghost, trying to pay a debt to someone who was already gone. He had saved Lila, but he felt no peace. He just felt the heavy weight of what came next. That night, the storm had passed, leaving the world silent, white, and frozen. The moon was a bright sliver, making the snowfields glitter. Noah was asleep, or pretending to be, rolled in his blankets by the door. Lila watched him. She had been watching him for days. He was not like Kendrick. He was quiet. He did not shout. He did not touch her, except to fix her ankle. He gave her food and did not demand she pay for it. He turned his back. But he was still a man. He was still her captor. He had said, "You're mine now." She could not stay. She could not trade one cage for another, even a bigger one. Slowly, quietly, she got to her feet. She was wearing his shirt and his duster. She eased the cabin door open. The cold air hit her face, sharp and clean. She stepped out. The snow was deep, crusty on top. She took a step, and another. She was going to run. She would run until she found a town, or she would run until she died. Either was better than being owned. She made it 10 yards. Her body, starved for years, had no strength. The cold, the sudden exertion, the thin air, it all hit her at once. Her legs buckled. She fell forward into a deep drift, the snow swallowing her, cold and soft as a grave. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were water. She gasped, a cloud of fog in front of her face. She could not move. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her. She lay there, helpless, as heavy footsteps crunched toward her. Noah had not been asleep. He had heard her move. He had heard the door. He had waited, his heart pounding. He found her, a small, dark shape in the moonlit snow. She was not even weeping. She was just still. He knelt, and without a word, he slid his arms under her and lifted her. He carried her back inside the cabin. He did not scold her. He did not look angry. He just sat her down on the pile of leaves by the fire, which was now just glowing coals. He put his own bedroll around her shoulders. "You are not strong enough," he said, his voice flat, not angry. "Not yet. You go out there. You die. That is all." He sat back down, poked the fire, added a log. Lila watched him, her body shaking, not from the cold, but from the shock. She had expected to be hit, She had expected rage, yelling, punishment. She had received none of it. He had just brought her back, like she was a stray lamb, not a disobedient thing. The wall inside her, the one she had built of stone and silence, cracked, a tiny fissure. You did not hit me," she whispered. Her voice was a low croak, dry as dust. She had not spoken a full sentence in almost a decade. Noah stopped poking the fire. He did not turn. "I am not him." He settled back against the wall, pulling his hat low. He thought she was done, but the silence stretched, and then she spoke again. "Why?" Her voice was a little stronger. He turned his head to look at her. She was staring at him, her dark eyes huge in the firelight. "Why what?" "Why me?" she whispered. "Why would you come for someone like me?" It was the great, unanswerable question. He saw the cellar in his mind, the chain, the smell. He thought of his sister. He thought of the deep, profound wrongness of it, a wrongness that had settled in his bones. He had no grand, heroic answer for her. He had no words about justice or freedom. He just gave her the truth. "Because you were there," he replied softly. Lila stared at him. She searched his face. He was not lying. It was not a trick. It was the simplest, most terrifying, and most beautiful answer she could have imagined. He had not come for her because she was special, or because he was good. He had come for her because she was there, and she was in chains. It was a fact, like a rock or a tree. He was not a savior. He was just a man who saw a thing that was broken and fixed it. A feeling she could not name bloomed in her chest. It was warm, and it hurt. It was the first new feeling she had had in years. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire burned low. The cabin was small, and the space between them was filled with things unspoken. He was acutely aware of her. He could smell the soap on her skin. He could see the pulse beating in her thin throat. He was a man who had lived on guilt and vengeance for 5 years, and he had not known the company of a woman in all that time. She was not a ghost anymore. She was Lila, and she was beautiful, in a broken, fragile way, like a bird with a mended wing, and it scared him. He was terrified of breaking her. Lila looked at his hand, resting on his knee. It was a big hand, rough and scarred from rope and weather. It was the hand that had broken her chain, the hand that had cleaned her wound, the hand that had pulled her from the snow. Slowly, her own hands shaking, she reached out. She uncurled her fingers and laid them, light as a feather, on the back of his hand. The touch was a brand. Noah Hale snatched his hand back like he'd been struck by a snake. He stood up so fast he almost kicked the cookpot over. He turned his back to her, his shoulders rigid, his hands fisted at his sides. Lila recoiled, pulling her hand back to her chest, her heart stopping. She had done it. The wrong thing. The punishment was coming. But he just stood there, his back to her, staring at the rough logs of the cabin wall. "Do not," he said. His voice was a low, strained rasp. It was not anger. It was something else. It was fear. She watched his back, confused. He was trembling. He was not afraid of her. He was afraid of himself. He was afraid of the part of him that was not a protector, the part of him that was just a lonely, grieving man. He was terrified that if he let himself feel anything, he would become the very monster he had stolen her from. The air in the cabin was thick, electric, desire, unspoken and unwanted, simmered in the tiny space. It was the raw need for human connection, for warmth, for safety, and it was all tangled up with her fear and his guilt. Lila watched him, and for the first time, she was not afraid of him. She saw a man who was just as trapped as she was, just by different chains. That fragile moment in the cabin. That night she had touched his hand and he had pulled away like a man burned. It changed things. The air between them was tight, like a wire drawn thin. He was afraid of his own shadow. and she was afraid of the new, strange silence that had replaced the old, familiar one. But they did not have the luxury of fear. The world outside was coming for them. The thaw came 3 days later. The snow that had been their white curtain began to melt, and the world reappeared, brown and dripping and muddy. Noah grew restless. He stood by the broken door for hours, staring out at the trees, listening. "He will know I am gone," Lila whispered. She was sitting by the fire, mending his torn shirt with a piece of thread he had used for his harness. Her fingers were clumsy, but she was patient. "He will," Noah said, not turning. "And he will not let it go. A man like Kendrick does not lose property. He does not let a secret walk away." "I am not a secret," she said, her voice so low he almost missed it. "I am a person." Noah turned and looked at her. Her face was cleaner, but still hollowed by starvation. Her eyes, though, were clear. They were not the panicked animal eyes he had found in the cellar. "Yes," he said, "you are, and he will hunt you like one." That afternoon, he saw them. 3 riders, far off, dots on the crest of the opposite hill. They were moving slow, fanned out, their heads down, reading the ground. The melting snow had shown them the tracks. "Baxter," Noah said, his voice flat. He recognized the foreman's horse, even at a distance. "We have to go, now." There was no time to pack. He stamped out the fire. He grabbed his saddlebags, his rifle, and put the heavy duster back on Lila. He put her on the horse, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he said, and they plunged back into the wilderness. It was not a flight. It was a nightmare. The ground was a trap of half-frozen mud and slush. The horse strained, its breath pluming in the damp air. They followed no trails. They stuck to the canyons, the deep woods, the places that would tear at their clothes and their skin, but hide them from view. They rode until the horse was trembling with exhaustion. Then they got off and walked, Noah leading the animal, Lila clinging to the stirrup, her new booted feet sinking deep into the mud. The blizzards returned, but they were wet, heavy storms now, not the dry powder of deep winter. They were soaked to the bone, the cold a living thing that chewed on them. They crossed rivers that were choked with moving ice. Noah would go first, the water chest deep, the current trying to steal his feet. He would tie his rope to a tree, then come back for Lila, carrying her on his back, the horse swimming behind them. She would cling to him, her face buried in his neck, her body shaking so hard he thought her bones would come apart. He would get her to the other side, and they would collapse, gasping, before starting again. They ran out of food. The snares he set came up empty. One night, they saw a pinprick of light, a small homestead, a sod house dug into the side of a hill. Smoke rose from its chimney. "Stay with the horse," Noah whispered. He slipped his knife from his boot. "No," she said, grabbing his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Do not for me. I will not eat if it is stolen." She had been property. She would not be the cause of someone else losing theirs. "We will die, Lila," he said, his voice hard. "Then we die." He looked at her, at the fierce, stubborn set of her jaw. It was the first time she had ever defied him. He saw the woman she was supposed to be. He put the knife back. He went anyway, but he did not go to the house. He went to the smokehouse, a small shed behind it. He broke the lock, his hands sure. He took 1 ham and a string of sausages. He left $3 on the plank floor, more than the meat was worth. It was almost all the money he had. When he came back, he pushed the food into her hands. "I paid," he said. She did not ask how. She just wept, her face turned away from him, and then she ate. They pushed west, toward the territory line, toward lands where Kendrick's name meant nothing. After 2 weeks of running, they came upon a town. It was not a town. Really, it was a scar, a collection of muddy tents, raw plank buildings, and whiskey mills thrown together in a deep, Muddy Valley. It was called Last Chance. It was a place for men running from the law, from debts, from wives. An outlawed town. It was perfect. Noah rode the horse right down the middle of the one street. Men stopped to watch them. Hard-faced men with guns on their hips and no light in their eyes. Women in dirty, bright dresses watched from the doorways of the saloons. Lila pulled the bonnet he had bought her low over her face. It was a tool, a disguise. It hid the scars on her neck, the haunted look in her eyes. Noah stopped at a building that called itself a hotel. It was just a saloon with rooms upstairs. He dismounted, then reached up for Lila. She took his hands and slid down. For a moment, she stood leaning against him, her legs too weak to hold her. The men on the porch watched, some of them laughing. "Get a room," one called. Noah ignored them. He kept one arm around Lila's waist, steadying her, and walked inside. The room smelled of stale beer and unwashed men. "A room," Noah said to the bartender, "and a bath, for my wife." The word hung in the air. Wife. Lila looked up at him, her eyes wide. He did not look at her. "Room is $1, the man said, wiping his hands on a filthy apron. "Bath is extra." Noah paid. The room was small, cold, and had one sagging rope bed, but it had a door with a lock, while Lila took the first real bath of her new life. Noah stood outside the door, his rifle in his arms. He did not trust this place. He did not trust any of it. When she was done, he went in. The room was filled with steam. She was sitting on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, her wet hair dark around her shoulders. She looked clean. She looked like a person. He nodded, then went to take his own bath. That night was the new test. One bed. Noah laid his bedroll on the floor by the door. "You take the bed," he said. Lila looked at the bed, then at the hard, dirty floor. "It is cold," she said. "I have slept colder. You will be near the door. If they come." She did not finish. She was afraid, but she was also practical. "The bed is big enough." Noah hesitated. He looked at her. She was not a temptation. She was a responsibility. And she was right. "All right," he said. "But I sleep on top of the covers, and I'm keeping my gun." He blew out the lamp. The room went black, lit only by the sliver of moonlight coming through the grimy window. He lay down on the quilt, on his back, his pistol resting on his chest. Lila slid under the blankets on the far side. The rope bed sagged, pulling them both slightly toward the middle. The silence was deafening. He could hear her breathing. It was shallow, quick. He could smell the lye soap on her skin. He could feel the small amount of heat coming from her body. He lay rigid, a rod of iron, staring at the ceiling. He was more afraid now than he had been when crossing the frozen river. She was just as still. She was terrified. She had not slept in a real bed in a decade. And she was lying next to a man. Not Kendrick, a different man. A man who had been kind. And that kindness was almost more frightening than the cruelty. The cruelty had rules. This had none. She was aching, not just with exhaustion. She was aching with a loneliness so deep it felt like the cellar itself. She was free, but she was floating. This man was the only thing holding her to the earth. They lay like that for hours, two statues in the dark. Finally, her voice, so small it was barely a breath. "Noah." He did not move, but his voice was awake. "Yes." She waited. Then she whispered, "Will you ever want me like a woman?" The question hit him like a fist. It was not a question of desire. It was a question of worth. Am I a woman? Am I even human? Or am I just a thing to be saved? A burden? Noah Hale's throat closed. He was tormented. He turned his head on the pillow to look at the dark shape of her. He thought of the cellar. He thought of her scars. And he thought of the way she had looked at him when he paid for the ham. He told her the truth. because it was the only thing he had.
"Lila,"
he whispered, his voice hoarse.
"I already do."
He heard her sharp intake of breath. "I see you," he went on, staring at the ceiling again, forcing the words out. "I see what was done, and I see you. You are strong, you are clean, you are—" He stopped. "I want you, but I will not." He turned on his side, to face her, though he could barely see her. "I did not break that chain just to put my own on you. You are free. That means you are free of me, too. I will not take advantage. I will not be that man." Lila lay in the dark, absorbing his words. He wanted her, but he refused to take her. It was a logic so foreign to her. It took her breath away. He was giving her a choice she did not even know she had. She did not know what to do with it. She only knew that the knot of terror inside her, the one that had lived there for years, loosened, just a little. She did not speak again, but for the first time in her adult life, she slept. They stayed in Last Chance for a week. They had to. The horse needed to be reshod. They needed supplies. Noah took a job. 2 days of work, mucking out the town's livery. It was foul work, but it paid in coin. Lila stayed in the room, but on the third day, she ventured out. She wore the bonnet, her head down. She walked. She just walked. She felt the wooden planks of the boardwalk under her feet. She saw the colors of the dresses, the hard faces of the men. She was invisible, and it was a wonderful feeling. But she was not invisible. A man was loading sacks of flour onto a wagon. He was a freighter, passing through. He saw her as her bonnet slipped, the wind catching it. He saw her face, and his own face went pale. He had hauled freight for Silas Kendrick for 5 years. He had seen the girl, the one who had run off years ago, the one Kendrick had sworn he would find. The man said nothing. He finished loading his wagon and drove it out of town, heading east, back toward Kansas. Word had been sent. The clock was ticking. Lila, ignorant of this, found a small, brave moment. She heard singing. It was coming from a tent at the edge of town, a canvas building with a crooked wooden cross out front. She looked inside. A man, an old preacher with a kind, wrinkled face and a threadbare coat, was speaking to a small group of children, 2 Mexican, 1 Chinese, 3 white. They were the cast-offs of the camp. "And the good Lord," the preacher said. "He gave us the word, so we might read it." He saw Lila in the doorway. He smiled. "Come in, sister. There is room." His name was Reverend Elias. He was a man who had seen too much sin to be shocked by any of it. He saw the scars on Lila's neck. He saw the fear in her eyes. He offered her a cup of weak tea. "You are new here," he said. "Passing through," Noah said, stepping in behind her. He had followed her, worried. "We are all just passing through, son," the preacher said. He looked at Lila. "Can you read?" Lila shook her head. Shame burned her cheeks. "It is just marks on a page," the preacher said gently. "Nothing to fear. Let me show you." For 3 days, Lila went to the tent. Reverend Elias taught her. He started with her name, Lila. She traced the letters in the dirt floor. It was the first thing she had ever owned. Her name. On the 3rd day, he gave her a small, worn primer. "You are free by law, child," he told her, his voice quiet. "The 13th Amendment. It says your bondage is over, but the law is just ink on paper. Men's hearts, those are harder to change. You learn to read. You learn to write. That is a freedom no one can take from you." Lila began to change. It was a slow, fragile thing. One afternoon, watching the preacher's clumsy dog chase its tail, a sound came out of her, a short, rusty bark. She clapped her hand over her mouth, horrified. Noah, who was waiting to walk her back, froze. He had never heard her make a sound that was not in fear or pain. It was a laugh. He looked at her feet. The shoes she had were the same ones from the cellar. ruined by the journey, wrapped in rags. That evening, he took the money he had earned from the livery. He went to the general store. He came back with a pair of sturdy, leather women's boots, not fancy, but new. He set them on the floor in front of her. "Your shoes are gone," he said, gruff. Lila looked at the boots. She touched the leather. She looked at him, and for the first time, she cried. Not in fear, not in grief. She just cried, tears running down her face. She put the boots on. They fit. She clung to these small joys. Her name, a laugh, new boots. They were anchors in a shifting world. The peace was broken on a cold, gray morning. A new man had ridden into town. He was not a drifter. He wore a good coat, 2 pistols, and had the patient, dead eyes of a hunter. He spent an hour in the saloon, asking questions. He had followed the freighter's report. He was a bounty hunter, and Kendrick was paying him well. He found Noah as he was coming out of the general store. Lila was with the preacher. "Noah Hale," the bounty hunter said. He was standing in the middle of the street. Noah stopped. His hand did not move toward his gun. "You have me at a disadvantage. Name is Riggs. I am here on behalf of Mr. Silas Kendrick. I have a warrant for your arrest. Theft." "Theft of what?" Riggs smiled. A thin, ugly motion. "A horse, a saddle, and a piece of property. A girl. You give her back, and I will let you ride out." "She is not property," Noah said. The street had gone quiet. Men were watching from the saloon doors. "She is, according to the man who owns her." Riggs said, "I do not care. I just get paid. Now, where is she?" "She is a free woman." "Not anymore." Riggs' hand moved, fast as a snake. He was fast, but Noah was not fast. He was something else. He was a man who had seen this 100 times in the war. He did not aim. He just reacted. His pistol was out, and he fired once. The sound was shockingly loud in the narrow street. Riggs looked surprised. He looked down at the red, spreading stain on his chest. Then he fell face first into the mud. Noah stood there, his arm outstretched, the pistol smoking in his hand. The silence was absolute. He had not killed a man since Shiloh. He had not wanted to. He had run from this. He looked at the body. He looked at his hand, and his hand began to shake. It was not a tremor. It was a violent, uncontrollable quake. His whole arm vibrating from the shoulder. The war, the guilt, the exhaustion, the fear. It all came rushing back. He could not make it stop. The saloon doors opened. Lila ran out, followed by the preacher. She saw the man on the ground. She saw Noah, standing over him, his body rigid, his arm shaking so hard his pistol was a blur. She did not scream. She did not run. She walked past the dead man. She walked right up to Noah, who was staring at his own traitorous hand as if it belonged to someone else. She took his shaking hand in both of hers. Her small, warm hands wrapped around his, around the gun. She held him. She did not speak. She just held him, absorbing the tremors, until his arm went still. Noah looked at her. He saw her, not as a victim, not as a burden. He saw her as a woman, standing in a muddy street, holding him steady. "You have to go," the preacher said, his voice urgent. "Now, I saw it. It was self-defense. But the sheriff here, he is paid by men like Kendrick. Go west. Do not stop." Noah holstered his pistol. His hand was still tingling. He looked at Lila. She nodded. He grabbed her hand, the one that had just saved him, and they ran. Running. That is what it was now. Not traveling, not escaping, just running. The murder of James Riggs in the street of Last Chance had changed the air. It was no longer a secret they were trying to keep. It was a crime they were running from. Noah had crossed a line, and he knew it. He had killed for her, and that knowledge sat between them, heavy and cold as the steel of his gun. They left the horse. It was too slow, too easy to trek. They plunged on foot into the high, broken canyons of the border territories. The land here was not like the plains. This was rock and shadow, red stone and thorny brush that tore at their clothes. The wind was still their enemy, but now the sun was, too, it beat on them, high and white, sucking the moisture from their bodies. They walked for miles. Their new boots, Lila's gift, holding up, but their feet aching inside them. The wilderness was cruel, but it was also a crucible. It was burning away what they had been. Lila changed. The woman who had flinched at the sound of a closing door was gone. The creature who had hoarded bread in a pocket was gone. This new woman, this Lila, walked with her head up. Her eyes were not on the ground, expecting a blow. They were on the horizon, searching for water, for shelter, for trouble. She had calmed him after he killed Riggs, and in that act, something had shifted inside her. She had held the shaking hand. She had held the power. She had seen him, the strong man who had saved her, and she had seen him break, and she had not run. She began to speak more. Her voice, still soft, lost its rusty croak. It became firm. "That way, Noah," she would say, pointing to a dark line of juniper trees. "There will be shade, maybe water." "You do not know that," he would answer, his own voice rough with exhaustion. "I know it," she would say, and she would be right. As she grew stronger, he seemed to fade. The man who had broken open a cellar door with grim purpose was vanishing. In his place was the man with the shaking hand. The killing of Riggs had undone him. It had brought the war back, the nights in muddy trenches, the smell of blood and powder, the ghosts he thought he had buried in Missouri. He had saved her from Kendrick, only to become a killer himself. He had dragged her into his own darkness. The guilt of it ate at him. He became careless. One evening, while cleaning his pistol, his mind was far away. His hands, still unsteady, slipped. The cleaning rod jammed, and his knuckle struck the sharp edge of the trigger guard. It was a deep, nasty cut, right to the bone. He just stared at it. He watched the blood well up, dark red, and drip onto the rock. He felt detached, as if it were happening to someone else. Lila, who had been gathering dry brush for a fire, saw it. She dropped the wood and was at his side in an instant. She did not gasp. She did not panic. She looked at his face, at his empty eyes. Then she looked at the wound. "This is a foolish thing," she said, her voice sharp. It was the first time she had ever used a tone of authority with him. She pushed him to sit. She took the canteen and poured precious water over the cut, washing away the grit and powder. Noah winced, the sting bringing him back. She tore a long, clean strip from the bottom of her own petticoat, a garment she had bought with their last few dollars, a symbol of her new life. She wrapped his hand, her fingers tight and sure. He looked at her focused expression, her brow furrowed. "You are bleeding like a stuck pig," she said, pulling the knot tight. He looked at her, surprised. A small, almost invisible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was the faintest trace of a tease. "I am a clumsy man," he whispered, shame washing over him. "Yes," she agreed, her voice gentle now. "You are. You think too much on what is behind. You need to look at your hands." "Noah Hale." She finished the wrap. Her hands lingered on his for just a moment. She was not just caring for him. She was holding him together. That night, they found shelter in a shallow cave, barely an overhang in the red rock. A cold wind blew down from the high peaks, carrying the first chill of autumn. They had one blanket between them. The fire was small, built in a hollow to hide its light. Noah sat on one side, Lila on the other. He was shivering, the blood loss and the cold seeping into him. He would not lie down. He would not show weakness. Lila watched him for an hour. Finally, she sighed. "You are a fool," she said, It was not an insult, it was a fact. She moved, crawling on her knees over to him. She lay down on the hard stone, pulling the blanket over herself. Then she looked at him. "Lie down, Noah, or you will die. And I did not walk this far to watch you freeze to death because you are proud." He looked at her, his face a mask of conflict. "It is just warmth," she said, her voice softening. "It is just shared breath. Lie down." He did. He lay on his back, stiff as a board, his wounded hand on his chest. She lay beside him, close, but not touching. They were two people, huddled together under a single blanket, staring up at the stone roof of their cave. It was not comfort. It was not desire. It was survival. But as the hours passed, the deep, bone-rattling cold forced them closer until their shoulders touched, and then their hips. They slept, and for the first time, Noah did not dream of the war. He dreamed of nothing. They traveled for another week, moving higher into the mountains. They found an old, abandoned homestead, a place where some hopeful family had tried to build a life and failed. The roof had caved in, and the wind moaned through the empty windows, but one room was still sound. Inside, among the scattered, broken belongings, Lila found something. It was a piece of a mirror, a large triangular shard, propped against a wall. The glass was clouded with dust. She wiped it clean with her sleeve. She looked at herself. She did not move for a solid minute. Her face was blank. She did not recognize the person looking back at her. The girl she remembered, the child from before the cellar, was gone. The creature from the darkness was gone. Too, this person was new. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp and high. Her eyes were huge, dark and clear. There were lines of sun and wind around them. There was a faint, pale scar that ran from her temple into her hairline. She was not beautiful. She was not ugly. She was just there. She was real. Her hand, of its own accord, moved up. She did not touch her face. She touched her neck. She touched the cheap woolen scarf Noah had bought for her in Last Chance. The same day he bought the boots. It was blue, the color of a morning sky. She had not taken it off. Her fingers traced the rough wool. Her expression was still blank, but her eyes held the reflection. She was looking at Lila, and Lila was looking back. That night, they stayed in the one good room of the ruined house. A storm blew in, a high-country gale that shrieked and clawed at the walls. They were trapped, but for the first time, they felt safe. They had solid walls around them. Noah sat by the small fire, his head in his hands. His wounded hand throbbed. He was breaking. The sight of this broken home, this failed dream, it was too much. "I did this," he whispered, his voice broken. "I did this to you." Lila was sitting on an old crate, watching him. "You did what? Give me a roof?" "I brought you here. I got you out, but I am leading you to your grave. I killed that man. I have murder on my hands. Kendrick will never stop. He will send man after man. I am not worthy to even sit near you. Lila." He was finally saying it. The guilt that had poisoned him since Last Chance. He was not a savior. He was a curse. "I am no better than him," he choked out. "I am just another man with blood on his hands." Lila was silent for a long time. She watched the firelight play over his bent back. Then she stood up. She walked over to him and knelt on the dusty floor in front of him. He would not look at her. "Look at me, Noah," she commanded. Slowly, he raised his head. His eyes were tormented. "He took," she said, her voice low and steady. He chained. You broke the chain. You are nothing like him." "I killed a man," he said, his voice raw. "You saved me," she said. "You killed a man who would have put me back in that hole. I will not be sorry for that. And you will not be sorry for it, either." He looked at her, at the absolute certainty in her eyes. The strength he had lost, she had found. She had picked it up from the muddy street in Last Chance, and she was giving it back to him.
Lila,
He whispered, his voice shaking. He was afraid, not of her, but of the aching need that was rising in him. The need to be held, the need to be forgiven, the need to be seen, not as a killer, not as a savior, but as a man. She reached out and, with a courage that stunned him, she touched his face. Her fingers were rough from the trail, but her touch was gentle. She traced the line of his jaw. He did not pull away. He closed his eyes, leaning into her hand as if he were a dying man, and she was water.
he was so tired. He was so broken.
She saw it. She saw all of him, and she was not afraid. She leaned in. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of fact. It was slow, hesitant, a question and an answer. His lips were dry, chapped. He was shaking. He put his good hand on her arm. His thumb stroked her skin. It was the first time he had touched her with simple, human affection. The distance between them, the wall of his guilt and her fear, it did not just crumble, it evaporated. This was not lust. It was a raw, aching need. It was the need of two people who had been utterly alone, in their own cellars, and had finally found a hand to hold in the dark. He pulled her closer.
She did not resist. She came to him.
It was slow. It was emotional. It was an unwrapping of layers, of the coats, the shirts, the bindings of guilt and memory. He touched the scars on her neck, and this time, she did not flinch. She laid her own hand over his, pressing his fingers to her skin. It was her body. It was her choice. It was not a taking. It was not a fever. It was a slow, quiet finding. It was a discovery of skin and bone, of breath and warmth. It was two broken souls mapping each other's wounds. And in the touching, finding a way to heal. It was the raw, undeniable vulnerability of being alive and being seen. It was the sound of her breath in his ear, the feeling of his heart beating against her chest. It was an anchor, a promise in the dark that they were not alone. After, they lay under the one blanket, the storm howling outside, the fire burning down to embers. They were tangled together. He was holding her, as if he was afraid she might blow away. He was the one who was shaken. He had broken his one promise to himself. He had taken... Lila, he whispered into her hair. She stirred, pressing her face against his chest. He had to say it. He had to set it right. You are not mine, he whispered, his voice thick. He was correcting the first words he had ever said to them, the words of a captor. He felt her go still. You are your own, he said. He was giving her back the one thing Kendrick had stolen, the one thing he was terrified he had just damaged. Lila was quiet for a moment. She absorbed his words. She understood them. He was not claiming her. He was releasing her. She lifted her head, her dark hair spilling over his shoulder. She looked him in the eye. Then she kissed him, hard. It was her choice. She was her own, and she chose this. They stayed in the ruined house for 2 more days. Healing, they talked. She told him about the cellar. He told her about Sarah. They were no longer a protector and a victim. They were Noah and Lila. But the world was still waiting. Their food was gone. The ham he had paid for was a memory. They had to go on. They walked out of the mountains and into a small, dusty valley. There was a town, a real town, with a sheriff's office and a church. We need supplies. Noah, Lila said, we cannot run forever. I know. He had the last of his money in his boot. You wait here, at the edge of town. I will go. No, she said, her hand on his arm. We go together. They walked down the street. People stared. They were a hard-looking pair, ragged from the trail. He was a man with a bandage on one hand and a gun on his hip. She was a thin woman with wild eyes and a bright blue scarf. Noah went into the general store. Lila stood outside, watching the street. A man stepped out of the sheriff's office. He was wearing a badge. He saw Noah come out of the store, a sack of flour in his good hand. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He had received a telegraph message that morning with a detailed description. "You?" the sheriff called out, his hand on his gun. "Hold right there." Noah froze. "What is your name, stranger?" Noah looked at Lila. She was 20 feet away, her hand at her mouth. "Noah Hale," he said. "I have a warrant for your arrest." "Noah Hale," the sheriff said, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. "From Prairie Creek, Kansas, for horse theft and for the murder of James Riggs." "The murder was self-defense," Noah said, his voice low. "And," the sheriff continued, his eyes flicking to Lila, "for the theft of property from Mr. Silas Kendrick." The street went silent. "She is not property." Noah's voice was a low growl. He dropped the flour. "That is for a judge to decide," the sheriff said. "I am arresting you on a false claim. Maybe, but the warrant is real. Do not make this hard." Noah knew he could not. He could not shoot a sheriff in a public street. He could not run. He raised his good hand, his bandaged hand. He held out to his side. A deputy came and took his gun. They put handcuffs on him. Lila watched, frozen. Her heart turned to stone. They led him past her. He would not look at her. He could not bear to see her face. The sheriff stopped in front of Lila. He looked at her, his eyes not unkind, just tired. "Ma'am," he said, "are you Lila?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "According to this warrant, you are a witness. You are not under arrest. Mr. Kendrick has arranged for your safe passage back to his ranch." Lila's blood ran cold. "You are free to go," the sheriff said. "The stagecoach for the east comes through tomorrow at dawn. You can take a room at the hotel." He tipped his hat and followed his deputy, who was pushing Noah into the small brick jail. She heard the heavy steel door slam shut. Lila stood alone in the dusty street. The flour sack lay spilled at her feet, a white stain on the brown dirt. She was free. She was safe. She was her own. She could get on that stage. She could be gone. She could disappear, find a new life, just as he had told her to. It was the smart thing to do. It was the safe thing. Or she could risk everything. She could fight for the man who had given her back her name. She looked at the jail. Then she looked at the sheriff's office, where a light had just come on. Her choice was made. Lila did not stand in the street for more than a minute. The spilled flour was a ghost on the dirt, a reminder of the life they had tried to have for one simple afternoon. The jail door was a solid, black square of iron. The stagecoach at dawn was a threat, not a promise. She had been free for weeks, but in that moment, watching them lock Noah in a cage, she understood what freedom was. It was not just being unchained. It was not just being her own. Freedom was a choice, and she was not choosing to run. She pulled the blue scarf tight around her neck. She pushed her shoulders back. The woman who had found her own reflection in the broken mirror, the woman who had held Noah's shaking hand, walked across the street. She entered the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a man named Cutler, looked up from his paperwork. He looked tired. "Ma'am, I told you, the hotel is just up the street. You should get some rest." "I am Mrs. Hale," Lila said. Her voice did not tremble. It was flat, cold, and clear. She was using the name Noah had given her in the outlaw town, using it as a shield and a weapon. "You are holding my husband." Cutler sighed, setting his pencil down. "Ma'am, I showed you the warrant. Your husband is wanted for murder in the territories and horse theft in Kansas. It is out of my hands. A federal marshal will be here on the train in 2 days to take him back." The murder was self-defense. Lila said. "The man he shot was a bounty hunter, sent to drag us back." "I am sure you will testify to that at his trial," Cutler said, his voice laced with practiced patience. "But that is not my decision. I just hold him." "And the other charge?" Lila's hands, hidden in the folds of her skirt, clenched into fists. "The one about property?" Sheriff Cutler had the decency to look ashamed. He looked down at the paper. "Mr. Kendrick's warrant claims the theft of 1 horse, 1 saddle, and 1 indentured servant." "I was not his servant," Lila said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I was his prisoner. He kept me in a cellar. He kept me in chains for more than 10 years. Your warrant is based on a lie." The sheriff looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He saw the truth. He saw the scars on her neck, peeking out from the scarf. "Ma'am Layla, I believe you. I do. This is ugly business. But I am a lawman. I have a piece of paper here from a judge. I cannot just ignore it because I want to. This Mr. Kendrick is a powerful man. My hands are tied. Now, please, go to the hotel. There is nothing you can do tonight." Lila stared at him. He was not a bad man. He was a weak one, a man who followed the rules even when he knew they were wrong. She had seen men like him all her life, the ones who looked away. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. She turned and walked out. But she did not go to the hotel. She went to the shadows. She found a dark alley across the street, one that gave her a clear view of the jailhouse, and she waited. She knew how to wait. She had done nothing else for a decade. She sat on a rain barrel in the dark, and she watched. The town went to sleep. The lights in the saloons went out. The street was empty. Around 11, Sheriff Cutler came out, locked the front door of his office, and walked to his small house next door. A light came on, then went out. One man was left, a young deputy. Lila had seen him. He was young, maybe 19, with a thin mustache. He would be at the desk all night. The lone guard. She waited 2 more hours. She waited until the moon was high and the town was in its deepest sleep. She was not cold. She was burning. She slipped from the alley. She moved across the dirt street, making no sound. The boots Noah had given her were sturdy, but she moved with a lightness she had learned when any sound meant a beating. She was a ghost. She reached the jailhouse. The front door was locked. She tried the window to the office. It was latched from the inside. She moved along the wall, to the back of the small building. There was a second window, smaller, for the cell block. It was barred, but the glass was propped open an inch for air. She could not get in. She went back to the front. She looked at the door. She looked at the lock. It was a good one. She had no tools. She thought, what did she have? She had herself. She had the darkness, and she had the story they all believed. She stepped back onto the boardwalk and walked, her boots loud now, to the front door. She began to hammer on it with her fist. "Help!" she cried, her voice high and full of panic. "Please help me!" She heard a chair scrape inside. The young deputy fumbled with the lock, his voice muffled. "What? Who is it?" "Please," she sobbed, leaning against the door. "He is back. A man. He is trying to get me." The door flew open. The young deputy, Billy, stood there, his hair mussed, his gun belt hanging loose on his hips. He looked confused, scared. "Ma'am, what is wrong?" "He followed me," she gasped, and she stumbled forward, right into the office, collapsing against him. "Whoa, ma'am, steady," he said, trying to hold her up. He had a knife," she whispered, and her head fell against his chest. And as he was trying to pat her shoulder, to calm the hysterical woman, Lila's hand, the one he could not see, moved. She was not the weak, fainting woman. She was a coiled spring. Her hand found the pistol on his hip. She drew it from his holster. A smooth, quick motion. She pushed herself back, bringing the gun up. The deputy's hands were still on her arms. He looked down at his own pistol. now pointed directly at his stomach. His face went white. "Lord," he breathed.
Do not speak.
Lila whispered. Her voice was not the voice of the sobbing woman. It was the voice from the grave.
Do not move.
"Lila!" Noah's voice came from the back. He was at the bars, having watched the whole thing. "What are you doing?" "Be quiet, Noah," she commanded, her eyes never leaving the deputy. "Take your hands off me. Slow." The deputy did. His hands rose in the air.
The keys,
Lila said.
where are they?
"On the hook," the deputy stammered, nodding at the desk. "Get them, and if you turn too fast, I will shoot you. I do not want to, but I will." The deputy, his hands shaking, walked to the desk and took the ring of keys. "Now walk to the cell. Unlock it." He did as he was told. He was terrified. This small, thin woman was the scariest thing he had ever seen. He fumbled with the lock. The cell door swung open. Noah stepped out. He looked at Lila, his face a mix of awe and terror. "His gun belt," Lila said. Noah took the deputy's belt. "Where is mine?" Noah asked the deputy. "In the locker there." Noah opened it. His gun, his holster, his knife. He strapped it on. He was armed. "Inside," Lila said to the deputy, pointing the gun at the open cell. "Ma'am, please." Lila cocked the hammer. The click echoed in the small room. The deputy scrambled into the cell. Noah slammed the door and locked it. The deputy grabbed the bars. "You will not get away. The sheriff will hear—" "He will," Lila said. She handed the deputy's pistol to Noah. But not in time. The deputy began to yell, "Help! Sheriff Cutler! Jailbreak! Help!" A light flashed on in the house next door. "The livery," Noah said, grabbing her hand. They burst out of the jailhouse door and ran. Behind them, they heard the sheriff's window slam open. "Billy, what is it?" "Jailbreak! Sheriff!" The front door of the sheriff's house opened. Cutler ran onto his porch, holding a double-barreled shotgun. He was in his long underwear. "Halt!" he yelled, lifting the gun. Noah did not stop running. He was pulling Lila, half dragging her. He turned and fired his pistol, not at the sheriff, but into the wood of his porch. The man flinched, ducked. That ducking gave them the second they needed. The sheriff recovered and fired. The shotgun boomed, a deafening roar in the night. The buckshot ripped through the air where they had just been, spraying the wall of the general store. They were at the livery. The doors were barred, not locked. Noah threw his weight against it, snapping the wood. Inside, the horses were nervous, whinnying from the gunshot. "Our horse," Noah said. "And we need another—" He found his gelding. He found a fast-looking mare. There was no time for saddles. He threw blankets on their backs, forced bits into their mouths. "Get up," he yelled, and cupped his hands. Lila put her foot in his hands and scrambled onto the mare's back. Noah swung onto his horse. They kicked the horses, hard. They exploded out of the livery, thundering down the dark, empty street. The sheriff fired his second barrel, but they were already moving too fast, shapes disappearing into the darkness. They did not take the main road. They cut between two buildings and headed north, into the woods, toward the mountains. They rode all night, pushing the horses, pushing themselves. The bareback ride was brutal. Their legs were raw, their bodies screaming. But they did not stop. At dawn, the horses were lathered, trembling, and could go no further. They were deep in a pine forest, high on a ridge. Noah slid off his horse, his legs buckling. Lila fell more than dismounted, collapsing onto the bed of pine needles. They were safe, for now. "Lila," Noah panted, coming to her. He knelt. He touched her face. "What you did back there, you were—"
"I had to,"
she whispered, her body shaking from the exertion.
"I was not leaving you in that cage."
"Hail!" The voice was not the deputy's. It was not the sheriff's. It was a voice that turned Lila's blood to ice. The voice that had haunted her dreams. The voice from above the trapdoor. Noah spun, his gun in his hand. Silas Kendrick rode into the clearing. He was on a huge black horse, and he looked calm. He was wearing an expensive black coat and a clean hat. He was not alone. Baxter, his foreman, was with him, and 2 other men, hard men, all with rifles. They fanned out, creating a half circle. Noah and Lila were on the ground. Their horses were spent. They were trapped. "He must have been in town," Noah whispered, his mind racing. He did not wait for the marshal. He came himself. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble." Noah Hale. Kendrick said. His voice was calm, conversational. He was not angry. He was in control. "You have cost me time and money, and you have damaged my property." He looked at Lila. His eyes were not angry. They were the eyes of a man looking at a broken piece of furniture. It was in cold, flat, assessing look. "She is not your property, Kendrick," Noah said. He was on one knee, his gun steady. But he knew. 4 rifles. He was outgunned. "She is," Kendrick said, as if explaining a simple fact. "She is a liar and a thief." He looked at Lila again. "Did you tell him, girl? Did you tell him how you ran off? How you stole from my dear dead wife? We kept you safe. We gave you food. We gave you shelter from a world that would have eaten you alive. And you repay us with this. Stealing my horse. Taking up with this killer." The words, the casual, powerful lies, they struck Lila harder than a physical blow. He was erasing her. He was painting her as the criminal. "You lie," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You kept me in the dark. You kept me in chains." Kendrick laughed. It was a short, sharp bark. "Who will believe you? A runaway with a wanted man? Or me, a man of standing? You are nothing. Girl, you are dirt. I own the ground you stand on." "She is my wife," Noah growled, standing up, placing himself between Lila and Kendrick. Kendrick's calm finally broke. His face darkened. "She is mine." "You want her," Noah said, his voice dropping. "You come through me. This is not your men's fight. Kendrick, it is yours. Let them go. Just you and me. A duel. For her." Kendrick looked at Noah, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "A duel? You fool. This is not some cheap storybook. This is my world. I do not duel. I take—" His hand moved. He did not go for his pistol. He raised the rifle that was resting on his saddle. He aimed it. But he did not aim it at Noah. He aimed it straight at Lila's chest. "Now, step aside. Hale," Kendrick ordered, "or I will put her down right here, like the stray dog she is." Noah froze. His gun was in his hand, but he could not fire. If he did, Baxter and the others would fire, and Kendrick would fire first. He would kill Lila. "Sir," Baxter said, his horse shifting, "this is not we were paid to catch them. Not—" "Silence," Kendrick roared. He was a king in his own mind. He was savoring this. He had the man, he had the woman, and he had the power. Lila stood behind Noah's shoulder. She could see Kendrick's face. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She saw the cold, satisfied look in his eyes. This was the end. He would shoot her, and then they would shoot Noah. He would erase the secret. She thought of the cellar. She thought of the chain. She thought of the dark. She thought of the deputy's pistol. She still had it. After the jailbreak, she had tucked it into the waistband of her skirt. Noah had his own. This one was hers. Her hand, the one that had held Noah's, the one that had touched her own face in the mirror, was steady. She was not a victim. She was not property. She was her own. She stepped out from behind Noah. "Kendrick," she said. Her voice, clear and cold in the morning air, startled him. He turned his head, his rifle still aimed. He turned to look at the thing that had dared to speak his name. Lila raised the pistol with both hands. She pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. It ripped through the quiet woods. Silas Kendrick looked down. He looked at his chest. A dark red flower was blooming on his clean, white shirt. He looked back at Lila, his face a mask of total, absolute surprise. He had not believed she was real. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He toppled, slow and heavy, from his saddle. He hit the pine needles with a soft, final thud. Silence. Noah's gun was up, pointed at Baxter. Baxter and the other two men had not moved. They stared at Kendrick's body. They stared at Lila, who stood, pistol still outstretched, smoke curling from the barrel. Baxter, the foreman, was a practical man. He looked at his dead employer, he looked at Noah, he looked at Lila. Slowly, he raised his hands, then let them fall to his saddle horn. "Our business was with him," Baxter said, his voice rough. "He paid our wages. He is dead." He nodded at Noah, and then at Lila. "We have no quarrel with you, Hale, or the lady." He turned his horse. The other two men, looking relieved, turned with him. They rode out of the clearing. They did not look back. Noah let his arm drop. He turned to Lila. She was still standing, her arms locked, holding the empty gun. Then her hands began to shake. It was not a small tremor. It was a violent, racking quake. The same storm that had taken Noah in Last Chance now took her. The gun fell from her limp fingers. Her knees gave out. Noah was there. He caught her before she hit the ground. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest. He held her as she trembled. The shock of the life she had taken, the life she had finally ended, washing over her in a wave. He just held her, his face buried in her hair, and let her shake. They stayed like that for a long time. When her shaking finally stopped, she was limp in his arms. He looked at the body. "We have to bury him," Noah said. His voice was gentle. They had no shovels. They used flat rocks from the stream bed. They used their hands. They dug a shallow grave in the soft earth under the pines. They rolled him in. They covered him with rocks and dirt. It was not a funeral. It was a hiding. It was an ending. When they were done, they were covered in dirt. They sat on a fallen log, the horses grazing peacefully nearby. The sun was high, and the mountain air was clean. Noah looked at her. Her face was streaked with dirt and old tears. Her hands were raw, her nails broken. "Lila," he asked, his voice quiet. He had to know. "Do you regret it?" She looked at her hands. Her own hands. They were still... "No," she said. Her voice was clear, without a single tremor. She looked up from her hands and met his eyes. "I regret waiting so long." They left. They rode north, into the high mountains, leaving Kansas and the territories behind. They crossed into Colorado. They were not running anymore. They were searching. They found a valley, high up, tucked between two peaks. A stream ran through it. Aspen trees covered the slopes, their leaves gold in the autumn light. It was empty. It was quiet. "Here," Lila said. Noah rode to the nearest town, a mining camp 2 days' ride south. He used the money he had taken from Riggs and the thick roll of bills he had found in Kendrick's pocket. It was enough. He bought tools, supplies, 2 pack mules, and a wagon. He came back, and he began to build. He cut the pine trees himself. He notched the logs. He built a small, tight cabin, with 1 room and a roof that would hold the snow. Lila worked beside him. She gathered stones from the stream for the fireplace. She mixed mud and moss and chinked the logs, sealing out the wind. While he built the walls, she planted. She found seeds from the wild plants in the valley. She planted flowers by the space where the door would be. Bright, stubborn, mountain flowers. He built a fence, not to keep anything in. just to mark their land. He planted the fence posts deep, one by one, a solid line against the wilderness. He was planting for permanence. She was planting for beauty. They worked side by side. They did not speak of the future. They never used words like forever or marriage. Those words belonged to a different world, one they had not lived in. But he built the doorway wide enough for two, and she planted enough flowers to last a lifetime. They did not speak of forever, but they both acted like it. A year does a lot to a person. It can heal a wound, or it can let it fester. For Lila and Noah, high in their Colorado valley, it was a year of slow, quiet mending. The seasons turned. The deep snows of their first winter melted into a riot of green, which then burned into the gold of aspen. The land took them in. The small cabin Noah had built was a home. It was tight against the wind. The chinking lilac had pressed between the logs holding firm. The flowers she had planted by the door had taken root, bright patches of blue and yellow against the dark wood. The fence posts Noah had planted marched in a straight, proud line, marking not a prison, but a choice. About 10 miles down the valley, the mining camp of Redemption had grown into a small, rough town. It had a church, a one-room building of raw pine, run by a Methodist preacher who believed in his name, and it was there, 3 days a week, that Lila went to work. She was not the woman who had stumbled out of a cellar. She was not the woman who had run, terrified, from a false charge. This woman, Lila Hale. She used the name quietly, but firmly, was a teacher. The church basement was a school for the children no one else wanted. The 3 black children of a freedman blacksmith, the 2 Chinese children from the laundry, and a handful of poor white miners' kids whose folks could not pay the town's main schoolhouse. Today, Lila stood in front of them, a piece of charcoal in her hand. She wore a simple, clean dress of dark blue wool. Her new boots, sturdy and oiled against the mud, were planted firm. Her hair, once a matted tangle of despair, was now thick and clean, pulled back in a long, neat braid that hung down her back. She smiled at the children. It was a small, careful smile. It reached her eyes, but it did not often turn into a laugh. Laughter was a thing she was still learning, like a foreign language, but the smile was real. "All right, Obadiah," she said, her voice clear and patient. "Show me the letter for house." A small, dark-skinned boy with serious eyes walked to the slate board. He picked up the charcoal and, with great concentration, drew a perfect H. "Good," Lila said. "Very good." She was a good teacher. She was patient. She knew what it was to be afraid of letters, to feel stupid and lost. She knew what it was to live in the dark. She would sit with the smallest ones, her hand over theirs, guiding the chalk, and she would tell them, "It is just marks on a page, nothing to fear. It is your name. You own it." She was giving them the one thing the preacher had given her, a freedom no one could take away. Noah was never with her. He did not come to town. He worked their land. The patch of earth they had claimed now had a fine, sturdy barn. He had 2 mules, his horse, and a milk cow. He had cut a field of hay from the high meadow and stacked it for the winter. He worked with his hands, from sunup to sundown. He was a quiet man. The haunted look was still in his eyes, but the shaking in his hands was gone. He had found a peace, not in vengeance, but in the planting of fence posts, in the solid, honest work of building a life. He never entered Redemption, not for supplies, not for a drink. The town was a place of noise, of laws, of men. He had had enough of all 3. Except on Sundays. On Sunday mornings, he would saddle his horse, he would ride into town, and he would tie his horse to the hitching post outside the small pine church. He never went inside. He just sat on the top step, his hat pulled low, his back against a post. He would sit there for the whole hour. He listened to the bad singing, to the preacher's loud voice. He was not there for God. He was there for her. When the service ended, Lila would walk out, her children scattering. She would see him. She would nod. He would nod back, and he would wait, watching her talk to the preacher or to the blacksmith's wife. And when she was done, she would walk over. He would stand. He would not offer his hand. He would just stand by her. And together, they would walk to the general store, do their week's shopping, and then ride the wagon home. They lived together in the cabin. The town assumed they were married. They were Mr. and Mrs. Hale, but they were not. They had not spoken the words. They had not signed a paper. They were two people who had built a house and were living in it. Their bond was deeper than paper. It was a thing forged in snow, in fear, in blood, and in silence. It was unspoken, because it did not need to be spoken. It just was. This life, this quiet, fragile peace, was tested one afternoon in late summer. Lila was in the general store, buying thread. She was alone. Noah was working the hayfield. The store was empty save for her and Mr. Abernathy, the proprietor. The bat-wing doors creaked. A man stepped in, blinking in the sudden dimness. He was tall, wearing a long duster. Despite the heat, he had a cruel, thin mouth and eyes that were too close together. He was a stranger, just a freighter, passing through. He saw Lila. His eyes passed over her, then snapped back. He squinted, his head tilted. A slow, ugly smile of recognition spread across his face. Lila felt it, the cold, the old fear. It was a drop of ice in her stomach. She knew him. She did not know his name, but she knew his face. She had seen it through the cracks in the cellar wall. A lifetime ago. He was a man who had done business with Kendrick, a man who bought and sold people, a man-catcher. "Well, I will be," the man said, his voice a low, greasy drawl. He took a step toward her. "Mr." Abernathy looked up, nervous. "Fancy finding you here," the slaver said. "Heard you ran off with some killer. Old Kendrick put a $500 price on your head. Girl? Course, he is dead now, but $500 is a lot of money." Lila did not move. She did not look at the door. She did not look for help. The girl who would have run, who would have fainted, who would have frozen, was gone. Lila stood, her small parcel of thread in her hand. She turned her body, slowly, to face him. She was not a victim. She was a teacher. She was a woman who owned her own name. She was the woman who had shot Silas Kendrick. She looked him in the eye. She did not blink. She did not speak. She just looked at him. Her gaze was not angry. It was not fearful. It was cold. It was the cold of the cellar, the cold of the grave she had clawed her way out of. It was the gaze of a person who had seen the absolute worst of men, and he was nothing. He was just another bully in a long line of them, and she was done with bullies. The man's smile faltered. He was used to fear. He was used to tears, to begging. He was not used to this. He was not used to being looked at like he was a piece of dirt. He took an involuntary step back. This woman, she was not the scared, half-starved creature he remembered seeing in Kendrick's barn. This woman looked like she could, and would, end him. "Just passing through," he stammered, his bravado gone. Lila said nothing. She just held his gaze. The man nervously tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he mumbled. He turned, too quickly, and pushed his way back out the doors, into the safety of the sunlight. He mounted his horse and rode out of town. He did not look back. Lila let out a breath. Her hands were steady. She turned back to the counter. "That thread, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice perfectly calm. Mr. Abernathy, pale and sweating, just nodded and gave her the parcel. She had stared him down. She had won. The last ghost was gone. That night she told Noah. He was sitting by the fire, sharpening his axe. The stone made a soft, rhythmic shush-shush sound. She told him the story, plain and simple.
He did not stop his work. He just listened. When she was finished,
He paused, testing the blade with his thumb. "Good," he said. That was all. But in that one word, she heard everything. He was proud. He was relieved. He was content. That night, she started writing. She still had the primer from Reverend Elias. She had read it so many times. The pages were soft as cloth. Noah had brought her paper from town, a thick stack of it, and a bottle of ink and a new pen. She sat at the small table he had built for her. She lit a second lamp. She dipped the pen. She started writing. She wrote her name, Lila. Then she started writing her story. She wrote about the cellar. She wrote about the darkness. She wrote about the cold, and the chain, and the sound of Kendrick's boots. She wrote about the songs her mother had sung, the color yellow, the feel of the sun. She wrote about Noah coming down the ladder, about the blizzard, about the man in Last Chance, about the feel of the gun in her hand when she shot Kendrick. She wrote it all down. Her hand cramped. Her letters were clumsy, childish. But the words were strong. They were her testimony. Noah watched her. He never read it. He would not, unless she asked. But he watched her. He saw the way her brow furrowed, the way she chewed her lip, the way her hand moved across the page. "You should tell it," he said one night, his voice low.
"You should send it to a newspaper."
"To the law. So what happened, so they know?" Lila stopped writing. She looked at him. "It is not for them, Noah. It is for me, so I know it was real, so I never forget." She went back to her writing. She was not just a survivor, she was a witness. They settled into the quiet rhythms of their life. The cabin was their world. They worked, they ate, they sat by the fire. The bond between them was a solid, quiet thing. One night, she looked up from her papers. He was staring into the fire, his face peaceful in the orange light. His hands were resting on his knees. The bandaged hand from that first run was long healed, but he still had the scar, a white line across his knuckles. She thought of all he had done, all he had given up, his hunt for his sister, his old life. He had traded it all for her. "Noah," she asked, her voice soft. "What do you want?" He turned his head. "Want? I have a roof. I have food. The hay is in." "No," she said. She put her pen down. "What do you want? For you? You never ask for anything." He looked at her. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about his sister, Sarah, and the guilt that had driven him for years. He thought about his new life. He looked at Lila, at her clear, steady eyes, her braided hair, the ink stains on her fingers. He gave her the only truth he had left. "To see you sleep without fear," he said. Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She just nodded. Winter came again. It came hard and fast. The high valley was buried. Snow piled up against the windows, sealing them in. The wind screamed outside, a high, lonely sound. But inside the cabin, it was warm. The fire in the stone fireplace was a bright, roaring thing. A pot of stew simmered on the hearth. The light was orange and safe. Noah sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, oiling his rifle. Lila was finishing her writing for the night. She stacked the papers, put the ink bottle away. She was tired. A good, honest tired. Noah had laid their bedrolls and blankets out near the fire, the way they always did when the cold was this deep. He was already there, his back against a rolled-up blanket, reading a year-old almanac. Lila walked over. She stood for a moment, just looking at him, at this quiet, steady, broken man who had given her back her life. She climbed into the bed beside him. She slid under the warm wool blankets and lay on her side, facing him. "It is cold," she said. "It is," he agreed, not looking up from his almanac. "You can say it, if you want," she whispered. He stopped reading. He put the almanac down. He looked at her. He saw her face, soft in the firelight. He saw her, not as a ghost from a cellar, but as his Lila, his partner, his equal. He leaned in, his voice a low, rough whisper. "You're mine." It was not a claim of ownership. It was not the word of a captor. It was a statement of fact. It was a promise. It meant, "I am yours." Lila smiled. It was not her small, careful smile. It was a real one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She moved closer, until her head was resting on his shoulder. "Only because I say so," she replied softly. He put his arm around her. She put her hand on his chest. The fire burned bright. The storm howled, but it could not touch them. They held each other. They were survivors of the darkness, owners of nothing but their quiet love. And that was enough. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear from you, so please comment and tell us where you are listening from, and connect with other folks in our campfire. Do not forget to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts.